Hello again, 102. In this video, we will go over some of the initial actions of the Germans and the Japanese in the run-up to the Second World War, the prelude to the war, what is going on in the 30s. By the end of the decade, Roosevelt had decided that the only way for the United States to avoid another war was to offer all possible assistance to its allies, Great Britain and France, as we talked about. And his efforts to make the United States the arsenal of democracy ignited fierce debates between isolationists and interventionists, a debate that ended with shocking suddenness on December 7, 1941, when Japan staged their surprise attack against military bases in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And the main form of government the U.S. is facing during this time period is fascism. And in 1917, Wilson had led the United States into the Great War in order to make the world safe for democracy, it was felt. In fact, though, democracy is in retreat after 1919. Soviet communism was on the march during the 20s and 30s, and so too was its ideological opponent, fascism. Now we can go into this in more detail. A radical form of totalitarian government in which a dictator uses propaganda and brute force to seize control of all aspects of national life, the economy, the armed forces, the legal and educational systems, and the press. And at the same time, halfway around the world, the Japanese government fell under control of militarist expansionists eager to conquer China and all of South Asia. Japanese leaders were convinced that they were a master race with a mission to conquer and lead a resurgent Asia, just as Hitler claimed that Germany's mission on behalf of the superior Aryan race was to dominate Europe. And by 1941, there would be only a dozen or so democratic nations left on Earth, and only two major ones. And in Italy, this is Mussolini's headquarters in the Palazzo Braschi. See! Yes! This is an example of propaganda at work. And this was in 1934, this picture. Italy and Germany, Benito Mussolini comes to power first. And his black-shirted supporters, they seize control. And in 1925, he was wielding dictatorial power as El Duce, the leader. He had eliminated all opposition political parties, and he approved the killing of several political opponents. Germany was another matter. There was nothing amusing about Mussolini's German counterpart, the Austrian-born Adolf Hitler, who Mussolini privately described as an aggressive little man, probably a liar, and certainly mad. Hitler and the Nazis claimed that they represented a German Aryan master race whose purity and strength were threatened by liberals, Jews, communists, homosexuals, and other inferior peoples. Hitler promised to make Germany strong again by uniting all German-speaking peoples of Europe into a vast empire that would give fast-growing Germany Lebensraum, or living space, to expand and dominate the lesser races, and most of all, rid the continent of Jews. Hitler had little patience with conventional political processes, but he became chancellor legally. The Nazis became the majority power in the Reichstag, or the German parliament, and because of that, President von Hindenburg made Hitler chancellor, and not soon after that, he created the Nazi police state. And he is the master of the political rallies that he held at Nuremberg, where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people would attend. And they were very hypnotic, and the German people bought what he was selling. And they soon expanded. As the 1930s unfolded, a catastrophic series of events in Asia and Europe sent the world hurtling toward disaster. In 1931-1932, some 10,000 Japanese troops had occupied Manchuria, a province in northeast China blessed with valuable deposits of iron ore and coal, and they will rename this place Manchukuo. At the same time, China is fragmented by a civil war between the communists led by Mao Zedong and the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek. And in the mid-30s now, because of what they're doing in China, there is a huge military buildup beginning in Japan. In 1935, Mussolini launched Italy's reconquest of Ethiopia, which was a weak nation still independent in Eastern Africa. They had controlled it until 1896, and Mussolini dismisses this as a country without a trace of civilization, even though it's the center of Coptic Christianity, one of the sects of the Christian faith. And when the League of Nations objected, Mussolini ignored it. And also in 1935, Hitler, in flagrant violation of the Versailles Treaty, began rebuilding Germany's armed forces. The next year, he sends 35,000 soldiers into the Rhineland, which is supposed to be a demilitarized buffer zone between France and Germany. And then they had a staged vote. 99% of the Germans living in the Rhineland approved of Hitler's actions. And the failure of France and Great Britain to counter his bold moves convinced Hitler that the Western democracies were weak and frightened. While the peace in Europe is unraveling, the Japanese government fell under control of aggressive militarists. In 1937, a government official announced that the tide had turned against liberalism and democracy that once swept over the country, or over the nation. And on July the 7th, 1937, Japanese and Chinese soldiers clashed at China's Marco Polo Bridge west of Beijing, and the incident quickly developed into a full-scale conflict. This is the second Sino-Japanese war. The first one had been in the 1890s. From Beijing, the Japanese army swept northward toward Nanjing, the home of the nationalist Chinese government. And this is the beginning of the Second World War in the Pacific. And in 1937, the Axis alliance, the Triple Axis, forms between the three major fascist powers, Italy, Germany, and Japan. More on that in part 2.